Our final section in this chapter is going to be discussing what WACC is used for and what we can see as a result of WACC. So the first thing that we see it's being used for is like a hurdle rate for projects. So the weighted average cost of capital gives us our weighted average from all of our different costs of capital that our firm uses. So it's an overall cost of financing for our firm. So it can be used as a hurdle rate for projects. In other words, if a project is going to be financed based on money that the firm has, and let's say it generates a 10% rate of return, but the WACC is 15%, then the project wouldn't make the cut. It's only generating 10%, but costing 15%. It can also be used to see, does the firm create or destroy value? In other words, this is the cost per every dollar that the firm brought in. So is it creating or destroying value relative to other firms? Finally, it can be used to decide, is there something wrong with our financing? So have we taken on too much debt? Have we not used enough equity? Or most commonly, have we not used any preferred stock or used preferred stock as well as we could? So one of the first things that we will see as a potential capital structure change is the idea that we may be facing a debt overhang problem. A debt overhang problem is the idea that even though debt is the cheapest source of financing, because it pays, the fact that it is paid off first in the event of bankruptcy, one, makes it the least risky because you have first claim on assets, but two, that potentially sets you up for a situation where it increases the risk of all other assets. So think about building a giant game of Jenga, right? The bottom pieces are your debt. The larger the proportion of the Jenga pieces that are made up of debt, the more likely it is that as you start to pull out from that base, the entire Jenga piece will fall. So as you increase the amount of debt you have in your capital structure, you not only increase the cost of debt because you're increasing the risk of debt, but you increase the risk of everybody else not being able to be paid back because the bondholders, the debt holders, own such a large or have such a large claim on the assets of the corporation that there's little to nothing to be left over for the equity and preferred stockholders. Therefore, it increases their risks as well. So the two risks associated with debt, not only their cost of debt, and you know from your student loans, especially if you took out private ones, right, your cost of debt goes up each year as you take out more and more loans, right? So that's the first, that's the obvious cost of debt. The second cost of debt is the increased cost of equity associated with that increased risk from having more debt. So that could be called the debt overhang problem, and it can be illustrated using this deadweight loss. For those of you who are familiar with economics, here's our value of our firm if it's all equity financed. What happens here? The value of the investment, but now we have a deadweight loss when we are including that portion that must go to pay back the debt holders. So also for those of you familiar with economics, I have two different illustrations of something known as a debt Laffer curve. So we can think about it as the idea, increasing the proportion of debt in your capital structure is good, until it's really bad, until we hit this point, the vertex where the amount or the percentage of financing coming from debt is so much that it does not matter how good a project is, you still cannot issue any more debt to cover that project. Otherwise, it ends up being detrimental to the firm. So think about it this way, like you're eating Girl Scout cookies, right? Eating Girl Scout cookies is good until you've like eaten a whole box and then you feel sick, right? Then it was bad, or you start to feel sick, then taking another bite would make you feel sick, right? So you've experienced this idea. So even though debt is the cheapest source of financing, you don't want to be overly financed with debt because you open yourself up to this debt overhang problem. So if you can't finance too much with debt, what about preferred stock? So is preferred stock more or less risky than debt to investors? Well, preferred stock's more risky than debt in general because you don't have to pay the dividend on preferred stock. But if you are going to pay a dividend at all to your common stockholders, you have to pay the dividend to the preferred stockholders first. So you can't pay a dividend on common stock, can't raise additional funds. Preferred stockholders could gain control of the firm if you don't pay out your preferred stock. So sometimes what we see is if a firm has taken on too much debt, it may decide, instead of issuing more common stock, it may decide it wants to go and issue some preferred stock.